Hello and welcome to the Chaplain's Study podcast from Reliant Ministries. I'm Chaplain Dave, and today the title of my message is Truly Safe. In order to make a powerful point about this subject, I'm going to attempt to tell you two stories. Actually, I'm going to narrate two important historic events that happened, one in the Old Testament, one in the New Testament, to make my point. And with that, with no further ado, I'll just dive into the first of these. The old man was used to the ridicule. He and his sons had been working on this project diligently for many years. The sheer size of the structure and its peculiar nature made it an attraction for travelers to come and see. This may have brought tourism revenue to some of the locals, but it simply annoyed most of the old man's neighbors. The other characteristic that bothered those around the old man was his preaching. He was always begging people to change their ways and prepare for a disaster that none of them really believed possible. Eventually, most of the people just ignored him. They had their own lives, their own jobs, and their own problems. As time passed, social and political corruption grew steadily worse. Morality became a public joke. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Free sex and gender uncertainty ruled the day. Violence was rampant. Justice was laughable. Most people were terrified of what was coming next, but they were too proud and wicked to cry out to God for help. Instead, they sought relief through intoxication, hedonism, and idolatry. In the middle of this tragic setting, the old man and his sons continued to work day after day on the huge object that their relatives and neighbors resented as a horrible eyesore. The old man continued to preach, and the people around him continued to laugh. Days passed into months, and months dragged into years. Decades came and went. Corruption flourished. Wickedness and violence tore families apart. Millions of people created in God's image were destroyed by their own foolishness, while the old man continued to build. It seemed like nothing would ever be different until the day when everything suddenly changed. The project was complete. God told the old man, Noah, to enter the ark with his wife, his sons, and his sons' wives. All of the pairs of animals were aboard. The door closed, and suddenly it began to rain. The ark was the instrument of salvation for Noah, his family, and representative pairs of all the non-aquatic animals. All other humans and the animals not on the ark perished in the global flood. That is a true story. Noah's descendants repopulated the earth after the flood. Sadly, those descendants all carried the sin nature inherited from Adam and Eve inside them. It was not long before wickedness again flourished on earth. About 2,400 years after the earth dried out from the great flood in Noah's day, another powerful event happened on water somewhere near the middle of the Sea of Galilee in northern Israel. Jesus, God the Son, had stepped out of heaven's throne room and entered humanity to save Noah's descendants from sin and death. On this particular night, Jesus was traveling across this freshwater lake in a boat with his closest followers. Several of the men in the boat were professional fishermen. They had left their fishing business when they answered the call to follow Jesus in his ministry. All of the men in the boat had seen Jesus perform many miracles. They watched as he healed the sick, cast out demons, and fed multitudes with only small handfuls of bread and a few fish. These men were Galileans, They knew this natural lake that they were on. They were all familiar with the weather patterns here, even those who had not made their living on the water. This night, they had been rowing for hours against a steadily increasing wind. Even before they boarded the small vessel, they were all exhausted from the labor of many months spent working alongside their master and teacher. Jesus himself was fast asleep in the back of the boat. The men were, at first, glad to see him finally taking some rest. They knew he was exhausted. As the wind grew, they lost interest in the master while they concentrated on their thoughts and efforts toward reaching the other side of the lake safely. The wind intensified to a low howl and then to a deafening shriek. The boat was now past the point of no return in the crossing. They had come too far to gain any advantage by turning around and going back. They were right in the middle. They had to continue pulling the oars while the wind gained even more intensity. The blowing spray was now augmented with slashing rain that stung the eyes and skin. The fishermen thought briefly about raising the sail and running with the wind toward the shore, but they knew the light rigging would never take the strain. The surface of the water slowly transformed itself into great rolling mountains and deep cavernous troughs. The men who were not struggling with the oars were furiously bailing with anything they could find to keep as much water out of the boat as possible. They were losing the battle with the wind, with the rain, and with the spray. The men were now terrified. The fishermen knew they were doomed. The boat would founder. They could not save it. They were lost, and they knew it. In that moment, one of these men remembered the master asleep in the back of the boat. He reminded the other men, and they were momentarily distracted from the raging storm by the astounding spectacle of someone actually sleeping in the boat through it. A couple of the men sloshed desperately through the calf-deep water that was rapidly filling the sinking boat. Fear and shock drove them to shake Jesus awake with the plaintive cry, "Master, Master, we are perishing." Jesus woke up and looked around. He immediately rebuked the wind and the raging waves. The screaming wind stopped instantly. The rolling mountains of water suddenly flattened into glassy calm. Can you imagine that? 1 second the rain was flying in sideways with stinging ferocity. A moment later, the only drops in the boat came from the soaked occupants and water falling off the small mast and spars. The boat slowly righted itself on the now mirror-like surface. Jesus looked at his followers as they stared in stunned disbelief. And relief, I might add. His question in that moment may seem insensitive or even shocking to someone who does not understand the truth. He asked them, "Where is your faith?" We don't know whether they answered the question or not. It's not important. The question itself was spot on accurate and appropriate in that strange moment. You see, the person who invented water molecules at the moment of creation also presided over Noah's flood, also parted the Red Sea, also brought water from the rock in the wilderness, turned the water into wine, and walked on the water on this same lake. This was the person sleeping in the back of the boat during the storm. The disciples, they didn't realize that they'd been safe the whole time. With Jesus in the boat, it didn't matter what the storm did. If Jesus is in the boat, it doesn't matter what's going on around us. The boat would not sink with him in it. They were perfectly safe while he was in the boat with them. I don't know how many times I have to say that, but it's true. Please hear this. They were perfectly safe while he was in the boat with them. The boat in this story represents our lives, our marriages, our families, our businesses, our churches. If Jesus is in the boat with us, we are safe, just like them. Just like Noah was safe in the ark. Just like they were really safe in the boat with Jesus in it. Storms will come and go. If you haven't noticed that, look around. Storms come and go often. Jesus said we would face tribulation in this world as his followers. He also promised to never leave us or forsake us. The disciples' real problem in this situation wasn't the storm. It was their faith, or the lack of it, and their perception of the relative danger of the circumstances. Jesus told his followers that he would physically return to earth someday and do away with sin completely and to rule perfectly over his people as our God and Shepherd and King of Kings. If you have a Bible, please do me a favor. Turn to the New Testament book of Matthew. We're going to read chapter 24, verses 37 through 39 together. That's Matthew chapter 24, verse 37 through 39. I'll give you just a couple of seconds to find it. While you're looking, Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man in this passage. He was talking about himself. Okay, so let's go. He said, "For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For in those days, before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man." Time seems to have passed slowly since Jesus said those words. Jesus went on from that stormy night on the Sea of Galilee. He eventually allowed people just like us to beat him to a bloody pulp and nail him to a Roman cross so that he could die in our place. That was to pay our price for our sin and rebellion against God. That sin nature that we've inherited from Adam through our fathers. The gospel of the cross has been preached worldwide during the 20 ensuing centuries after that. Wickedness, violence, and immorality has degenerated the human family now to a point seemingly as low as it was, maybe even lower than it was in the days of Noah. Those days of Noah occurred almost 2,000 years after the fall of man in the Garden of Eden. Some have speculated it was about 1,750 or so years after Adam fell in the Garden of Eden. It's now been just over 2,000 years since the resurrection of Jesus. Around 4,000 years ago, God had Noah build an ark to save Noah and his family. Now, Jesus himself is our ark. Noah preached and warned people to seek shelter from the approaching disaster of the flood for many years while he and his sons built that ark. The servants of God have been preaching for the last 2,000 years, warning people to take refuge in Jesus. Whether or not these are really the last days immediately before the return of Jesus, they are the last days for all of us. It's a 1-for-1 ratio. All people die. I don't know how old you are. I know how old I am. And I know My last days are upon me. Violent physical and spiritual storms surround all of us all the time. Life on earth in these claymation bodies is short. We've all been warned to take refuge in Jesus. If you've not yet done that, please call out to him in prayer right now. Surrender everything to him right now. It's the best decision you'll ever make. If you've watched this podcast all the way through, it means that God's calling you to himself through Jesus, his son. He loves you. John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." The next verse goes on to say, God didn't send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Jesus came to save all of us, not just Jews, not just Greeks, not just men, not just women, not one race, not another race, all of us. We've all descended from Adam and Eve. He loves you. Jesus stepped out of heaven to come and save you. And God's calling you right now to himself. Won't you surrender everything? Won't you live forever? Put your faith and trust in Jesus. Ask him to forgive your sins and set you free from sin and death. Come join us in Jesus and welcome aboard. Please join me next time in the Chaplain study. God bless you.